In my profession, you learn to listen to what the stones are saying. After 30 years as a gemologist on Fifth Avenue, I can tell the difference between a glass imitation and a natural diamond just by the way they hold the light. But today, it wasn't the light that betrayed the truth. It was a sound. The laundry room in our Hamptons home was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic, muted hum of the Miele washer. The air didn't smell like cheap perfume. It smelled of steam, warm cotton, and the faint herbal sharpness of high-end, unscented detergent. It was the scent of a well-ordered life. Or so I thought. Then I heard it. Clink, clink, clink. A heavy, dense metallic strike against the drum's interior. Most people would ignore it, thinking of a stray coin or a forgotten key. But I know the weight of 18-karat gold. It has a gravity to it, a duller, more authoritative thud than common brass or nickel. I paused the cycle. The machine gave a soft, mechanical sigh before the door clicked open. I reached into the damp warmth, my fingers finding the sleeve of Harrison's navy Brioni blazer. The wool was fine, cool even when wet, the kind of fabric that speaks of boardroom meetings and old-school power. Deep within the silk-lined interior pocket, my hand closed around a small velvet-covered square. I pulled it out. Even soaked, the color was unmistakable. That specific, iconic shade of robin's egg blue that has launched 1,000 heartbeats and ended just as many. I didn't tremble. I didn't gasp. I simply popped the latch of the Tiffany & Co. box with a steady thumb. Inside sat a Cartier Panthère ring, emeralds for eyes, diamonds meticulously paved across a white gold body, its feline form coiled in a silent, permanent snarl. It was a masterpiece of design. It was also a size 5. I wear a size 7. My hands are the hands of a woman who has built a legacy, who has raised children, and who knows the exact weight of a promise. They do not fit into size 5 fantasies. A younger woman would have felt the world collapse. She would have stormed upstairs, wet blazer in hand, and demanded an explanation that would inevitably be a lie. But I've spent my life under the magnifying loupe. I know how to spot a fracture before the entire stone shatters. The irony was as sharp as a fresh-cut baguette. Harrison, a man who built an empire on attention to detail, had forgotten the one person who pays more attention than him. I looked at the Panther's emerald eyes. They weren't mocking me. They were a warning. A warning that the 30 years we'd spent building this, the Mercedes in the driveway, the cherry board seats, the shared history, was being traded for something that fit in a size 5 box. I didn't shed a tear. Instead, I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. I carefully tucked the ring back into its velvet bed, snapped the box shut, and pushed it back into the damp darkness of the blazer pocket. I smoothed the wool, placed the jacket back into the drum, and pressed resume. Clink, clink, clink. I walked into the kitchen, my silk robe whispering against the marble floor. I tapped my MacBook Pro awake on the mahogany island and waited for the Nespresso machine to finish its pour. As I took my first sip, bitter, hot, and focused, I didn't think about a lawyer. Not yet. I thought about the Pearl Anniversary Gala in 2 weeks. Harrison had spent months planning his perfect speech to honor our 3 decades together. I decided right then that I would let him give that speech. I would let him keep his secret and his ring. After all, a diamond is only formed under extreme pressure, and I was about to turn the pressure all the way up. The skyline of Manhattan viewed from the River Café is a masterpiece of light and glass. But tonight, it felt like a curated stage set for a very expensive lie. Harrison had booked our usual table, the one where the silver is always polished to a mirror finish, and the staff speaks in hushed tones that respect the weight of our last name. He sat across from me, looking every bit the successful patriarch in a charcoal suit, his Rolex catching the dim amber light as he gestured for the sommelier. "To 30 years, Victoria," he said, his voice smooth and aged like the vintage Bordeaux he'd just ordered. "And to many more." I raised my glass, the crystal cold against my fingertips. I didn't feel like a wife celebrating an anniversary. I felt like a doctor examining a patient who was trying to hide a terminal diagnosis. "To the secrets we keep to protect the ones we love," I replied, my tone as dry as the wine. He didn't blink. He simply smiled. The same practiced, charismatic smile he used on shareholders to mask a bad quarter. As the first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of scallops, Harrison reached into his blazer pocket. For a split second, I wondered if he would pull out the blue box from the laundry. But Harrison is a man of sequences. He wouldn't give away the prize before the main event. Instead, he slid a smaller, rectangular box across the white linen. "A little something to hold you over until the gala," he whispered. I opened it. A pair of diamond studs. They were approximately 3 carats each, clear and perfectly cut. To any other woman, this would be a triumph. To me, it was inclusion management, a professional term for covering a flaw with a brighter light. "They're flawless, Harrison," I said, my eyes meeting his. I wasn't talking about the diamonds. I was talking about his audacity. "Only the best for you," he said, leaning back with a look of immense self-satisfaction. As the evening progressed, I watched him navigate his iPhone with a subtle, practiced stealth. He kept it face down on the table, a habit he'd developed over the last 6 months. Every time it buzzed, his hand would twitch, a micro-expression of anxiety that he thought he was hiding. "Work?" I asked, gesturing to the device. "Just the IPO details," he lied, his eyes drifting toward the window. "The lawyers at Park Avenue are being particularly meticulous tonight." "Meticulous is good," I said, taking a slow bite of my sea bass. "It prevents mistakes, like leaving something where it doesn't belong." He paused, his fork midway to his mouth. "What do you mean by that?" "In a contract, Harrison," I smiled, the expression never reaching my eyes. "One small oversight can ruin the entire deal." When he excused himself to the restroom, leaving his phone behind, I didn't reach for it immediately. I waited, maintaining my poise as a waiter refilled my water. When I finally looked, a notification illuminated the screen. It wasn't from a lawyer. "Did you hide it? I can't wait to see it on my finger at the Met." The sender was B. Vance. I didn't feel the sting I expected. Instead, I felt a sharp, crystalline sense of purpose. He wasn't just giving her a ring, he was planning to debut her, and my replacement, at our anniversary gala. I put the phone back exactly as it was. When Harrison returned, he found me looking out at the Brooklyn Bridge, a calm, inscrutable smile on my face. "Everything okay, darling?" he asked, tucking his phone back into his pocket. "Perfect," I said. "I was just thinking about the gala. It's going to be a night that New York will never forget." I took a sip of my water, the ice clinking against the glass, a sound that reminded me of a certain Cartier Panthère currently tumbling in a dryer in the Hamptons. The game wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the Sinclair legacy, and a size 5 mistake that was about to cost him everything. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Park Avenue penthouse, casting a sharp, uncompromising light on the mahogany desk that had belonged to my grandfather. Harrison had already left for the office, likely to prepare for the IPO, though I now knew that his preparation involved more than just spreadsheets. I sat in my ergonomic chair, the leather cool against my back, and opened my MacBook Pro. In my line of work, you don't just look at a diamond, you look through it. You search for the inclusions, those tiny internal flaws that tell the true story of the stone. Harrison's financial records were no different. To the untrained eye, they looked like the healthy heartbeat of a real estate empire. To me, they looked like a masterpiece of misdirection. I sipped my Nespresso, the dark roast as focused and bitter as my intent, and began to trace the administrative expenses of his latest development project. It was a tedious process, but patience is a virtue I perfected while waiting for rare stones to come to auction. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I needed to find the thread that would unravel his entire tapestry. I identified 3 recurring payments to an LLC titled BV Ventures. It wasn't even creative. Brianna Vance. He was siphoning funds from our family trust to a luxury condo address on 5th Avenue. He was treating our 30-year legacy as a personal piggy bank for a girl who likely couldn't tell a cubic zirconia from a D flawless diamond. I tapped my Mont Blanc pen against the desk, a rhythmic sound that echoed the metallic clink of the ring in the washing machine. It wasn't just the jewelry or the dinners. He was moving significant capital, far more than a simple affair would require. I pulled up an iPad and accessed a secondary file my contact at the bank had quietly flagged for me. There it was. A signature page for a secondary loan. Harrison was trying to secure for his newest startup. My signature was at the bottom. The ink was perfect. The slant was exact. But I hadn't signed it. He wasn't just betraying our marriage, he was committing a crime. He was forging my name to underwrite his risks, effectively tying my personal assets, the gallery, my private collection, my inheritance, to his potential failure. He was setting me up to be the safety net for his mistress's lifestyle. The pain was there, a dull ache behind my ribs, but it wasn't a weakness. It was fuel. Harrison had become arrogant. He thought that because I was the quiet wife who curated the art and hosted the galas, I wasn't paying attention to the machinery underneath. He forgot that a diamond is formed under extreme pressure, and I was about to turn the pressure all the way up. I closed the laptop with a satisfying click. I pulled out a small Amazon box from my bag, containing a forensic document kit I'd ordered. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a judge. Harrison wanted to play with fire in a house I had built brick by brick, and I was more than happy to let him burn. I picked up my iPhone and dialed Dominic, my attorney. "It's time, Dominic." He didn't just break the vow. He broke the law. "I want every offshore trace, every forged document, and every cent accounted for before the sun sets today." As I hung up, I looked out at the New York skyline. Harrison thought he was the smartest man in Manhattan. He just didn't realize that I was the one who owned the view. The air in the Chelsea gallery was thick with the scent of fresh oil paint, expensive champagne, and the quiet desperation of social climbers trying to look like they belonged. I stood near a minimalist sculpture, holding a glass of sparkling water, no ice, and wearing a vintage Dior suit that fit like a second skin. At 55, I've learned that true power doesn't need to shout. It simply occupies space with a quiet, lethal authority. "Victoria, you look timeless," a voice chirped, sharp and artificial. I turned to see Brianna Vance. She was 26, wearing a dress that was a shade too tight for a gallery opening and clutching a Lady Dior bag as if it were a shield rather than an accessory. She looked like a lab-grown diamond, chemically identical to the real thing, perfectly bright but lacking the depth and soul that only centuries of pressure can create. "And you look current, Brianna," I replied, my voice a smooth, professional velvet that gave nothing away. She smirked, her eyes darting to my ears, checking for the 3-carat diamond studs Harrison had given me at the River Cafe. "I saw Harrison at the office today. He seemed preoccupied with the IPO, I assume." "Harrison is always preoccupied with things that have high valuations," I said, taking a slow, measured sip of my water. "It's his greatest strength, and his most predictable flaw." She leaned in, the faint, cloying scent of a mass-market celebrity perfume invading my space. "I hear the Pearl Anniversary Gala is going to be the event of the season. I'm so looking forward to the surprise Harrison has planned." I watched her hand flutter to her throat. She wasn't wearing the Cartier Panthère ring yet. I knew it was still tucked in the damp darkness of a Brioni blazer in the Hamptons. But she was wearing a gold bracelet I recognized from our joint credit card statement. "Surprises are risky, Brianna," I said, my gaze dropping to her wrist with the precision of a jeweler identifying a fake. "In gemology, a surprise usually means an inclusion, a hidden crack that devalues the entire piece. You can polish the surface all you want, but if the structural integrity is compromised, the stone is worthless." Her smile faltered for a microsecond, a hairline fracture appearing in her confidence. "I think some things are worth the risk of a little instability." "Spoken like someone who has never had to pay for the damages," I replied. My iPhone buzzed in my clutch. A notification from my private investigator appeared on the screen. "Photos of the Fifth Avenue condo delivery confirmed. She moved in today." I didn't let my expression change. I simply looked at Brianna, seeing not a rival, but a temporary tenant in a life that didn't belong to her. She thought she was the lead actress in a romantic drama. Yet she didn't realize she was just a prop in my final act. "Enjoy the art, Brianna," I said, patting her arm with a gloved hand. "Take a good look at the Vanishing series over there. It's all about things that look solid until you change the lighting. It's quite educational." I walked away before she could respond, my heels clicking against the polished concrete with the precision of a metronome. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, where my driver was waiting in the Mercedes S-Class. As we pulled away into the Manhattan twilight, I opened my MacBook Pro on my lap. I had 10 days until the gala. 10 days to ensure that when the lights went up at the Met, Harrison wouldn't be debuting a new wife. He would be debuting a total collapse. The midnight air in my private library felt heavy, not with luxury, but with the weight of 30 years of shared history. Harrison was asleep down the hall, likely dreaming of his IPO or his Fifth Avenue acquisition. I sat in the dim light of a single floor lamp, the glow reflecting off the dark wood of the shelves that housed first editions and memories I could no longer trust. I reached for the Amazon box I had brought in from the foyer earlier. I didn't need more jewelry or designer clothes. I needed a different kind of clarity. I pulled out a new copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. My original version from college was battered and annotated, but I wanted a fresh start, a clean slate for the mind that Harrison assumed was too preoccupied with dinner parties to notice his betrayal. I took a slow, grounding sip of my Starbucks coffee. Black, no sugar. The bitterness a necessary contrast to the artificial sweetness of the life Harrison had curated. As I flipped through the pages, a passage caught my eye. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. I leaned back, my eyes drifting to a small, silver-framed photograph on the corner of my desk. It wasn't a professional portrait from a gala. It was a grainy shot of Harrison and me in 1995, standing in front of our first tiny apartment in Queens. We were eating $5 pizza, our clothes were thrifted, and we had nothing but a shared ambition and an early model Kindle that I had saved up to buy him so he could read his business books on the subway. Back then, we were a team. I was the one who appraised the first small diamonds he bought to flip for profit. I was the one who stayed up until dawn, helping him edit his pitches on a clunky desktop. Harrison had forgotten the man in that photograph. He had traded the substance of our legacy for the sparkle of a size 5 ring and a girl who saw him as a bank account rather than a partner. The pain was there, a dull ache behind my ribs, but I suppressed it with the same clinical detachment I used to grate a stone with a heavy inclusion. I realized that my tears wouldn't fix the fracture in our foundation. Only precision would. Harrison hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed the girl in Queens who believed in him. That was an unforgivable debt. My MacBook Air chimed softly on the ottoman. A new email from Dominic, my lawyer, appeared. I opened it, expecting more financial traces. Instead, I found a scanned document, a signature page for a secondary loan Harrison was trying to secure for his newest venture. My signature was at the bottom. The ink was perfect. The slant was exact, but I hadn't signed it. He wasn't just siphoning money anymore. He was forging my name to underwrite his risks, effectively tying my personal assets to his potential failure. He was setting me up to be the safety net for his mistress's penthouse while planning to discard me. I closed the laptop, my hands perfectly steady. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a judge. Harrison wanted to play with fire in a house I had built brick by brick. I took one last sip of my coffee and looked back at Marcus Aurelius. It was time to stop being his partner and start being his reckoning. The morning light over Park Avenue was clinical, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble island where Harrison sat. He was engrossed in his iPhone, that familiar, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he tapped out a message. I didn't need to see the screen to know it was for Brianna. I sat opposite him, my movements deliberate and calm, sipping a Starbucks dark roast that tasted of burnt earth and resolve. Harrison, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a diamond through glass. I was reviewing the IPO structure on my MacBook Pro last night. The secondary lenders are asking for more familial security before the final lockup period. He looked up, his eyes flickering, with a momentary flash of irritation before the greed took over. What kind of security? A consolidated asset agreement, I replied, sliding an iPad across the table. The screen displayed a dense legal document, drafted by Dominic Rossi. It's a standard move for families of our standing. It shows the board that our interests are perfectly aligned. It's a show of strength, Harrison. It tells the market that the Sinclair name is unbreakable. He scanned the pages, but I knew his mind was already miles away, lyrically calculating how this so-called strength would fund the Fifth Avenue penthouse he had just acquired. He saw the paragraphs of legalese as mere hurdles to his freedom. He didn't see the poison pill I had meticulously buried in Section 4, a clause that triggered an immediate, irrevocable transfer of all joint assets to my private trust in the event of any undisclosed legal or moral liabilities discovered before the IPO. The forged signatures I had found on the loan documents were the legal liability. The Cartier ring in the laundry was the moral one. He was signing his own eviction notice, and he was doing it with a smile. "It's a bit aggressive, don't you think?" he asked, though the lure of a successful IPO was already clouding his judgment. "High-stakes real estate is an aggressive game, Harrison," I said, meeting his gaze with a warmth that was entirely manufactured. "We've been a team since Queens. I'm just protecting our future." He reached for his Mont Blanc pen, the gold nib catching the light as he signed the digital document with a flourish. He thought he was securing his empire. In reality, he was locking the door of his own cage from the inside. "There," he said, handing the tablet back. "Now, I have a meeting at Wall Street. I might be late tonight." "Take all the time you need," I replied, my smile thin and inscrutable. As I watched him walk toward the elevator, I felt a surge of crystalline satisfaction. My iPhone vibrated in my hand, a notification that the document had been filed and time-stamped with the Sinclair Family Trust. I walked out to the foyer, where my driver was waiting with the Mercedes S-Class. The Gala was only 1 week away, and the countdown to his public disappearance had officially begun. The rain began to streak the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Park Avenue study, mirroring the fractured reality Harrison was trying to build. He had been quiet for days, the kind of calculated silence that usually precedes a carefully orchestrated disaster. He didn't know that I had spent my afternoon at a private lounge in Christie's, not to appraise jewels, but to meet with a forensic accountant who specialized in the dark corners of Wall Street. When Harrison walked into the library, he wasn't wearing his usual armor of arrogance. He looked frayed, his brioni tie loosened, his eyes avoiding mine as he sat on the edge of the velvet armchair. He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound he likely thought made him look like a man defeated by a cruel market. "Victoria," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "The IPO, it's not what we thought. The secondary lenders pulled out. We're looking at a complete restructuring. In fact, I might have to declare the company insolvent to protect what's left of the family assets." I watched him over the rim of my teacup, the porcelain cool against my lips. To anyone else, he looked like a victim. To me, he looked like a low-grade diamond with a massive, visible fracture. He was trying to trigger a strategic bankruptcy, a move designed to wipe out the joint equity we shared, while he secretly moved the protected remnants into the offshore accounts I had already traced to Brianna. He wanted to leave me with the debt while he walked away with the cash. "Insolvent, Harrison?" I asked, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "That's a very heavy word for a man who just signed a lease on a Fifth Avenue penthouse for his consultant." He froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sallow under the warm amber glow of the library lamps. "I don't know what you're talking about. That's a corporate expense, a place for international clients." "Stop," I said, the word cutting through his lie like a diamond through glass. "Don't insult the 30 years I spent building your reputation. I've seen the wire transfers. I've seen the forged signatures on the secondary loans where you used my gallery as collateral. You weren't trying to save the family assets, Harrison. You were trying to anchor me to a sinking ship while you rowed away in a lifeboat." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The silence in the room became absolute, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. He realized then that I hadn't been the quiet wife mourning a dying marriage. I had been the architect of his enclosure. "You thought you were playing a game of chess with a trophy," I continued, standing up and smoothing my silk trousers. "But you forgot that I'm the one who knows how to spot a fake from across the room. You're not declaring bankruptcy, Harrison. I've already exercised the clause you signed last week. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, every joint asset, every offshore penny, and this very roof over your head belongs to my private trust. You are officially the only insolvent person in this room." He looked at his iPhone, his hands shaking as he tried to call his lawyer, or perhaps Brianna. "Don't bother," I replied, walking toward the door. "I sent Brianna a copy of the insolvency papers you were planning to use. I told her you were broke and under FBI investigation. It's amazing how fast love evaporates when the bank account hits zero. She's already cleared out the penthouse and changed her number. I left him sitting in the dark, surrounded by the luxury he no longer owned. The gala was only a few days away, and New York was about to see a masterpiece of justice. The Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a cathedral of glass, limestone, and ancient Egyptian artifacts, but tonight it served as a gilded cage for Harrison Sinclair. I walked through the towering doors wearing a custom Dior gown, a shade of black so deep it seemed to absorb the camera flashes of the waiting paparazzi. Around my neck was a vintage Tiffany & Co. diamond collar, each stone cold and heavy, a silent reminder of the decades I had spent polishing a reputation that was currently being held together by a thread. Harrison stood at the center of the room, looking like a man who owned the air itself. He adjusted his Cartier cufflinks, his smile as radiant as the polished marble floors. He didn't know that the Pearl Anniversary Gala was no longer a celebration of our past. It was a funeral for his future. "You look stunning, Victoria," he whispered, leaning in to kiss my cheek. He smelled of expensive scotch and the lingering scent of desperation. "Tonight is going to change everything." "Oh, Harrison," I replied, my voice a soft, lethal purr. "You have no idea how right you are." I watched him move through the crowd of New York's elite, shaking hands with the board members of his IPO and flirting with the wives of investors. He was playing the part of the devoted patriarch to perfection. But I was the one who had written the script for the final act. I took a glass of vintage champagne from a passing waiter, the bubbles sharp against my tongue, and caught the eye of Dominic Rossi across the room. He gave me a single, imperceptible nod. The music dimmed, and the lights focused on the stage at the far end of the hall. Harrison climbed the stairs with a confidence that would have been admirable if it weren't so hollow. He took the microphone, looking out at the hundreds of people who held his destiny in their portfolios. 30 years ago, Harrison began, his voice amplified and warm, I met a woman who saw a greatness in me that I hadn't yet discovered. Victoria has been my rock, my partner, and the silent strength behind the Sinclair legacy. To commemorate our Pearl Anniversary, I wanted to share a small tribute to the life we've built together. He signaled to the tech booth. He expected a montage of our children's graduations, our wedding photos in Queens, and the growth of his real estate empire. He expected the room to be filled with the soft glow of nostalgia. Instead, the massive screen behind him flickered and displayed a high-resolution scan of the secondary loan agreement, specifically the signature page where my name had been forged next to his. The room went deathly silent. Harrison froze, his hand still raised in a theatrical gesture. Before he could react, the image shifted. Next was a photograph, taken by my private investigator, of Harrison and Brianna Vance standing in the lobby of the Fifth Avenue penthouse, him handing her the robin's egg blue Tiffany box I had found in the laundry. The final slide was the most devastating, a copy of the poison pill agreement he had signed just days ago, highlighting the clause that transferred every single joint asset to my private trust upon the discovery of his financial fraud. The whispers began like a rising tide. The board members leaned forward, their faces darkening. Harrison turned to the screen, his mouth falling open, his face a ghostly white under the spotlights. He looked like a man watching his own execution in high definition. I stood in the front row, my glass of champagne held steady. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply looked at him with the same clinical detachment I used to identify a fracture in a low-grade diamond. "Victoria?" "What is this?" he stammered, his voice cracking through the speakers. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. 2 officers in plain clothes stepped onto the stage from the wings. They didn't care about the Cartier cufflinks or the Rolex on his wrist. They cared about the federal warrant for forgery and grand larceny that Dominic had filed an hour ago. As they led a handcuffed Harrison through the crowd of New York's finest, the silence was absolute. I watched him go, feeling a sharp, crystalline sense of peace. He had wanted the world to see him tonight, and I had made sure they saw every single inclusion. The fluorescent lights of the NYPD precinct were a brutal, unforgiving contrast to the soft amber glow of the Metropolitan Museum. Harrison sat in a cramped interrogation room, his Brioni tuxedo jacket missing and his white shirt stained with the sweat of a man who had finally run out of exits. The Cartier cufflinks and his Rolex had been confiscated, placed in a plastic evidence bag that sat on the table like a pile of discarded toys. He looked older, smaller, like a diamond that had finally shattered under the weight of its own internal pressure. Dominic Rossi stood by the door, his MacBook Air open as he reviewed the latest filings. He didn't even look at Harrison. His focus was entirely on the digital paper trail that was currently burying my husband's legacy in real time. I walked into the room, my charcoal wool coat draped over my shoulders and a silk Hermès scarf knotted at my neck. I felt a strange, crystalline calm. "Victoria," Harrison rasped, his voice cracking as he leaned forward. "You have to call Dominic off. The board, they're withdrawing the IPO. The investors are fleeing. We can fix this. I'll end it with her. I've already blocked her number. I'll do whatever you want." I sat down slowly, the metal chair screeching against the linoleum. I looked at him with the clinical detachment of a gemologist grading a stone with a fatal inclusion. "You're still talking about Brianna Harrison? You're so far behind the curve. She's already gone. She tried to return that Cartier Panthère ring to the boutique on Fifth Avenue this morning, hoping to get enough cash for a flight to Dubai. But I had already flagged the serial number as part of a grand larceny investigation. She was detained for questioning 2 hours ago." Harrison's face went sheet white, his eyes darting to the evidence bag. "Larceny? I bought that ring with my own money." "No," I corrected him, my voice a whisper of cold steel. "You bought it with funds siphoned from our children's college trust. Since I am now the sole trustee and owner of the Sinclair holdings, that money, and every luxury it purchased, belongs to me. You didn't just cheat on me, Harrison. You stole from our family. I'm simply reclaiming the debt." I pulled out my iPhone and slid it across the scratched metal table. On the screen was a notification from our private security firm. The Fifth Avenue penthouse had been locked down and the locks changed. The secondary loans he had forged my name on were being called in by the bank. Because of the poison pill clause he had signed in his greed, those debts were now his personal liability alone. "I have nothing," he whispered, staring at the screen as the reality of his bankruptcy settled in. "You have exactly what you brought into this marriage 30 years ago in Queens," I said, standing up and smoothing my coat. "A lot of ambition and a very expensive imagination. The only difference is, this time I won't be there to bail you out. I've spent my life polishing your reputation, Harrison. I think it's time I let the world see the raw, unpolished truth." I didn't wait for his reply. I walked out of the room, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing in the sterile hallway, like a metronome counting down the end of an era. Outside, the Manhattan sun was beginning to rise, reflecting off the glass towers of a city that was no longer his. I stepped into my car, opened my MacBook, and began the process of rebranding the Sinclair Gallery. Justice wasn't a loud explosion. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a door locking from the outside. 6 months later, Manhattan felt like a different city. Or perhaps I was simply seeing it through a clearer lens. The spring sunlight spilled across the reclaimed oak floors of my new penthouse in Brooklyn Heights, a space that smelled of fresh lilies and the grounding aroma of a Starbucks blonde roast. The view of the East River was expansive, unobstructed by the shadows of Park Avenue. I sat at my minimalist glass desk, my MacBook Air open as I reviewed the final branding for the newly renamed Sinclair Rossi Diamond Exchange. Harrison's name had been scrubbed from the building, much like the toxic influence he had exerted over my life for 30 years. My partnership with Dominic Rossi wasn't just professional. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect that I hadn't realized I was missing. Harrison's fate had been sealed in a windowless courtroom 3 months ago. He was currently serving a 5-year sentence for grand larceny and forgery, a man who had traded a mahogany empire for a bunk in a federal facility. His bankruptcy was absolute. As for Brianna Vance, she had vanished from the New York social circuit, her reputation as shattered as the lab-grown illusions she tried to sell. The Cartier Panthère ring was now a permanent exhibit in my gallery's History of Deception collection, a reminder that a stone's value is only as good as the hand that holds it. I reached for an Amazon box that had arrived that morning, pulling out a crisp copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves. I tucked it into my bag next to my Kindle, which was now filled with books on architecture and resilience, rather than offshore tax law. Healing, I discovered, didn't feel like a loud victory or a public shaming. It felt like the quiet, steady rhythm of my own heart, unburdened by the weight of a dying marriage. My phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. The auction for the Hamptons estate is finalized. You're officially free of the past, Victoria. Coffee at the River Cafe this weekend? I smiled. A real, effortless smile that reached my eyes. I wasn't in a rush to fall in love again, but I was open to the possibility of a life defined by truth rather than performance. I had spent my life appraising the worth of stones, but in the end, the most valuable thing I ever found was my own worth. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out toward the terrace. The city hummed below, a symphony of millions of lives, and for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't just a spectator. I was the architect of my own sunrise. 1 year after the Pearl Gala that redefined New York's social hierarchy, the city feels quieter, though my life is louder with purpose than ever before. I am standing on the cedar deck of my beach house, the morning mist lifting off the Atlantic to reveal a horizon that finally feels wide enough for my dreams. In my hand is a Starbucks latte, warm, earthy, and uncomplicated, and beside me lies my Kindle, open to a page on the quiet resilience of the soul. I sometimes think back to that rhythmic clink in the laundry room. It used to be a sound of betrayal, a sharp reminder of 30 years of deception that felt like a bad Wi-Fi signal in my heart. But today the only sound is the rhythmic heartbeat of the ocean and the gentle, steady hum of a life rebuilt in small, steady steps. The Cartier ring is a memory now, a relic of a woman I no longer am. I realize now that I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the heavy, suffocating need to be perfect for someone who was fundamentally flawed. My phone buzzes, a notification from an Amazon box delivered to my office, containing a gift for my daughter's graduation. I smile, realizing that the Sinclair legacy is finally being built on honesty. Dominic Rossi is coming over later, not for a legal briefing, but for a walk on the beach. He has become an unexpected steady friend, someone who understands the chaos because he's survived it too. Healing, I've discovered, isn't about reaching a destination where the pain disappears. It's about the morning you wake up and realize that you don't heal by forgetting what happened. You heal by choosing what comes next. I take a breath of the salt-tinged air, feeling light, free, and profoundly alive. The sun is fully up now, and for the first time, I am not just watching the light, I am the one holding it.